And we are back on the Zero Hour. Joining us now is my good friend Chris Bliss. Chris is a headline comedian on a national scale. He's been on The Tonight Show, The Late Show with David Letterman. He's an internationally renowned variety artist. He's open for superstars from Eric Clapton to Michael Jackson and on from there. He's also the founder of an organization we'll get to in a minute called My Bill of Rights. .org, and he did a great TED talk on comedy is translation. Chris says that comedy falls somewhere between poetry and lines and lies, excuse me, which is also true of a good political speech. So, Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, RJ, do I call you RJ?
You can call me RJ, you can call me Ray, you can call me anything. It doesn't matter what you say. You got to serve somebody.
I'm going to call you RJ Eskow. How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing real good.
All right, that wasn't supposed to be a trick question, by the way. It was kind of a lob ball, actually. But I'm glad.
Which one? How am I? Which one?
How are you doing?
The lob ball?
How are you doing?
Well, I'm just really thrilled to be on the air with somebody who got all the credits and stuff right. Didn't call it mybillofrights.com and didn't ask me about. There must be something on my Wikipedia page that says I'm a history teacher or something, because I keep seeing that in news articles when I get profiled. And he teaches American. No, I didn't even finish college, let alone teach anything. So it's nice that you actually get your facts right.
Well, and also, I would imagine you would appreciate an omission that I made, which we should get to. I think that maybe your deepest fear is that your obituary, hopefully a long, long time from now, will read, "The guy who did that juggling to Beatles music video," which was a huge success and a great thing, but I have a feeling you're afraid it will haunt you forever.
You know, I've gotten over that phase. I mean, whenever you get something that's as fortunate as that was, and it was such a window on the world for me, because that was one of the first truly viral videos, right 6 months after YouTube opened up, and it went all over the world, and I got like 30,000 emails, and it went through all those email trees and circles that people have, and I was even getting stuff like emails from humanitarian aid workers in African refugee camps. It was such a window on the basically, the suffering that people go through and how everyone needs something uplifting and I mean, so for me it was one of the most human experiences, and you never expect that a piece of performance that you're going to do, at least not what I was doing, would ever be that widely shared by people. So really it was a huge, great blessing. And it also happened right after I started mybillofrights.org. So it got the first round of press for this Bill of Rights Monument project. So, my real fear is that I'll only get single digits at my funeral, and there won't even be enough people to carry the ashes.
Right. Well, that's we all fear that, but that won't be the case, and you'll get lots of comments at your funeral too. Don't worry. But hopefully not too many likes. That's the trouble with social media, is that like is such an ambiguous term. But and for people who don't know, Chris's juggling to music video was in fact one of the first viral videos, and I'm sure you meet people all the time, even now, who see it and remember it, and rightfully so. It made a huge impression. So we're going to get to mybillofrights.org in a second, but I also wanted to talk for a minute, if you're game, about your TED Talk, because I really enjoyed your TED Talk, which is available online, which is Comedy is Translation. And you mentioned, I've read a lot of literature in translation and tried to read it in the original, and I have some opinions on that. But basically, what was your take? Why did you say that comedy is translation?
Well, it actually came from a book I was reading by Gabriel Garcia Marquez's favorite translator, who's a guy named Gregory Rabassa, and the book is called If This Be Treason. And if you're interested at all in the art of translation, this guy was terrific. And he said in the beginning of the book something that really struck me as the essential challenge of why it's so difficult for us to understand one another, which was that every act of communication is an act of translation. And the more I started thinking about that, the more I started thinking, well, that's why, we never take that into account. We always think that we're either preaching to a choir that, of course, will understand our own take and experiences on things, or we think that people are morons for not just getting it immediately. But, when you realize that all of our experience is so subjective and so individual, and that we're all basically speaking a different language to one degree or another, then you realize just how challenging communication is. And then you start to delve into the whole area of, well, how and when does it succeed? Particularly the kind of communication that I think is important to people like us, which is the communication that doesn't come from the conclusion backwards, but is actually an investigation into trying to discover new ideas and perspectives and new ways of making things actually work in the world, to where it's a communication where, not a debate. My dad was a lawyer, and I grew up with a guy that every conversation was about scoring points and winning, and I never understood it. I mean, to me, it was like, well, even in a debate, I hope we're both smarter at the end of it, because what's the purpose of it otherwise? So that kind of communication that opens us to new ideas, and that kind of critical thinking that is really, I think, in this complex world we're living in, more essential than ever. And
Well,
comedy is really well suited at getting past people's defenses. So the talk was kind of an exploration of what I learned from doing comedy about difficult subjects and how we can actually communicate with one another.
That's really interesting. We're talking with comedian and activist Chris Bliss, it's interesting because we've never talked about this, but my father, although not a lawyer, was a professor and then a college president, and a masterful arguer. And again, like your dad, wanted to win. But, I remember one of the teachers who worked for him saying it must be terrible to grow up with your father and lose every argument. And I said, I don't, because his trick is that he sets the rule of engagement before the debate even begins, and he sets it in such a way that you can't win. So you have to reject his premise. In other words, he says, if we agree that the Middle East is a haven for less civilized people, then it says, well, wait a minute, I don't agree. So interestingly, where comedy fits in is, I think, really funny, unexpected, humorous moments happen when those unspoken assumptions we bring to a situation are challenged, and that's the punchline, or that's the gag, is, oh, it was really your mom, or whatever. Do you know what I'm driving at?
Yeah, because comedy comes from the unexpected angle, and it is outside the rules of all debate. It can be an abstract form when it works really well, and just the fact that 2 + 2 never equals 4 in comedy. I think in the TED Talk I compare it to a verbal magic trick, where you think it's going over here, and then the next thing you know, something comes from completely the odd angle that catches you off guard and forces you to rethink the structure that you were ready to go into. I use an example from which is one of my own, if I can quote myself, one of my own favorite pieces of material, just because of how it works that way, which is doing a piece on gay adoption. Why is gay adoption controversial? Clearly, if you have a baby and you think the baby's gay, you should be allowed to put it up for adoption. And
Right,
the reason
exactly.
that I always like that joke is that it is really about this whole idea of what people want to refer to as an abomination, homosexuality, and instead attacking it with the image of an innocent newborn, and just making people question the whole idea whether this kind of labeling has any validity whatsoever. And it's inside a joke, and of course people laugh because it's the last place they think you're going to go is, hey, put that kid for adoption. You've given birth to an abomination. Get it out of your house. So
Right,
the
and
misdirection, yeah,
go
the
ahead.
misdirection is what delights, and it's also what opens the mind. And then laughter, of course, itself has its own physical response of releasing the endorphins, and that brings defenses down too. So you see, when you deconstruct all that, you see all those walls that exist for in the way of our communication, and then you can take them outside of comedy and go, well, what's the best way to, for me to not just keep running into walls or just preach to the choir, because I don't see a lot of use in that either.
So,
I used to say the only value I see in preaching to a choir is that it temporarily stops them from singing.
yes, right. The air will last a lot. That gag about the dungeon scene in Aida. The air will last a lot longer if you try not to sing. Um, the Okay, before we go to a break and then talking about mybillofrights.org, I gotta ask you your theory. why are conservatives so incredibly unfunny? I mean, I can laugh at a joke directed against my political point of view, but why aren't there any good ones?
Here is my. I hadn't really thought of it in those terms, but here's why I think. I think because ideologues, there's great ideas never come from ideologues because
Mm.
ideology is a box, and you can't think outside of a box when your whole worldview is structured in a box of a certain ideology. So I would say that's the real reason is that when you're too ideological, then anything that goes anywhere outside that box just is something you cannot translate, and so you end up rejecting
Mm.
it rather than going, "You got me there," you know.
Yeah, there's a certain closed box, is it? But there's a certain kind of humor that is, I guess, ideological in the sense that it's anarchic, it's disruptive. I mean, that's the best. I mean, this is why I got in trouble. Okay, you'll relate to this. I got in trouble because I wrote a piece slamming Saturday Night Live for siding with the Clintons over Obama in 2008. And I basically said, comedy works when it's subversive, not when it's backing powerful people against relatively unknown people. And next thing I knew, I was on the BBC, asked me if I wanted to be interviewed about it. And I was up against Lorne Michaels. It's like, great. Yeah, this is an enemy I want to make. Hopefully he didn't stick around for my segment, but by this sort of insurgency of comedy, no matter who's in power, left or right, it seems to me that that's its power, isn't it?
Well, I think comedy, if you look at it as a tool or a technology, it just depends on the user. But I very early on made a decision, made some rules for comedy for myself, and one was don't pick on the powerless because they're
Right.
already powerless. So I think that aspect of it, you really got a point there, which is that comedy, which is the communication that picks on the powerless. We have a word for that. It's called bullying.
Right.
But communication that challenges the status quo, which needs to be challenged because the status quo is static quo. It doesn't move,
Right.
and we need to keep moving to grow and to survive as a species. So I think that's the value of comedy is communication is when it is saying the emperor has no clothes has inherent value. So I agree with you on that. That's a good perception, RK.
All right, good. And after this, we'll talk about
RJ.
how our guest Chris Bliss, comedian, is challenging the status quo by promoting the Bill of Rights. Chris, if you can stick around, we're going to go to a break, and after that, we're going to have more conversation with Chris Bliss. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and we're talking with Chris Bliss, comedian, activist, and the guy who made that video of him juggling to Beatles songs, which millions upon millions upon millions of people saw. And he is going to talk to us. Hey, Chris, thanks again for joining us. And I wanted to talk a little bit now about your project called My Bill of Rights. I think the website is mybillofrights.org. And tell us about it.
Well, this actually started as a piece of comedy. I was doing something about the constant culture war arguments over the Ten Commandments displays being put up all over our public lands, and my argument was instead of taking those down, why didn't we put the Bill of Rights up next to them and comparison shop? Let people comparison shop because the Bill of Rights
Good
gives you
line.
such a
Hadn't heard
great
it.
deal. It tells you
Uh-huh.
speak freely, carry a gun, pursue happiness, and then it actually presumes that you're innocent, and my religion doesn't give me anything close to that deal. So then I just searched one night in a sort of a fit of idleness, Bill of Rights Monument. And to my surprise, there wasn't any such thing anywhere in the United States. And I really thought, how can that be? This isn't just one of our most important documents. It's arguably one of the most important documents in human history, certainly one of the most influential ones. I mean, it's the most successful assertion of individual rights and liberties ever written. The phrase itself has become ubiquitous as a result of the success of the document. So I started a Bill of Rights Monument project called mybillofrights.org. And our first success was a small display in a town called Montezuma, Iowa. And our second success was a major monument at the Arizona State Capitol, which we dedicated on Bill of Rights Day, December 15th, 2012. And now we have something really exciting coming to Washington, D.C. next year, Richard, which is
Which is
a Bill of Rights comedy concert that'll be February 28th at the Warner Theater. Headlined by Lewis Black. We're going to have legends like Dick Gregory and Tom Smothers are going to be there, and we're filling out the rest of the roster around them. And it's to raise money for a matching fund endowment, which is to seed Bill of Rights monument projects at the rest of the state capitals around the country. All the information's on the website, but I can just say by using the lessons learned in Arizona, not trying to replicate the design, but trying to replicate the template, we think, we looked out the numbers, and we could do something on the scale of Arizona. If people go and look what we did there, they're not going to be what they expected. It's a major monument. It's a wonderful sculpture. It works as art as well as education and inspiration. For a matching fund that's roughly 60% of what it would cost to put up the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington today, we could have Bill of Rights monuments at every state capital in the country. And people go, well, big deal, monuments at state capitals. Every school kid in a state winds up going on a field trip to their state capital at some point. If the Bill of Rights was on display in monumental form at every state capital in this country, it would be seen by millions of impressionable young Americans every year for the next 100 years, not to mention the people who work in and around those buildings, which are, after all, the center of our civic life in this country, the state capitals. And I happen to believe in the power of ideas. You start taking those numbers, millions of kids a year for 100 years being exposed to the Bill of Rights in an inspirational, monumental format. I don't think it's going to touch every single one of those kids, but the ones who are going to wind up working in those buildings and working in government are the exact ones who are going to be attracted to this kind of display and inspired by it. And when they do go into public service, they will go into it with ideas and ideals behind them that have certainly proven the test of time. So, and all for a cost of $12 million, I think, is what we're trying to raise ultimately for the endowment. $25 million, we could do this at every state capital. And I call it slow motion activism because it's the kind of thing where you're just replanting the seeds of what made America great to begin with, which was the concepts and principles around, a free, fair, just, and civil society. And all in less than 500 words, which I know I've already used more to describe it. So people should go to mybillofrights.org, check it out. The comedy community has been great in supporting this. Lewis Black has been just incredible. We also did a comedy concert like this in Arizona. It really put that project on the map. And we also have a private event for major donors and sponsors. If anybody's interested in looking at that, the night before the concert, we're going to have a private dinner and reception at the National Archives. So we will be having dinner with the Bill of Rights, and this is all still being put together right now. But the dates are firm: 27th of February at the Archives, 28th of February, the Bill of Rights comedy concert at the Warner Theater, and more announcements to come as to the final talent lineup.
Well, I don't know if really rich people, like the kind that would be at your private event, listen to this show, but if they do, they should definitely sign up for that and then give me a call because I have certain needs I want them to address. But having said that, listen, so you've got, tell me a little bit so that I can picture and the audience can picture. Okay, Arizona seems to be the best working example. So you go in, how does that work? Is it like take us through what you envision happening in other state capitals that happened in Arizona?
Well, the real reason we developed this model of a matching fund is that the hardest thing to do for a monument project is raise money for a design without a design, for example. The process itself has many different benchmarks and stages to it. So we figured if we had a pool of money and said, look, you can do something on this scale. We spent a little less than $500,000 for what we did in Arizona. Do it in your state. You run the project. We'll help you vet the design process and everything else. We'll help you get through the legislative approvals process, and we will match you each step of the way in raising the money. I know if somebody had come to me and said, I'll give you half the money for your monument, it would have made it a lot, it would have made it a lot easier to start that process. So by creating a pool of money, you're creating an incentive. By doing a major event in Washington, you're drawing attention to the idea. And we're also doing a lot of ancillary events around that. And if there's a pool of, if you build it, they will come. And if you've got a pool of money, people will organize local efforts and come to you to go, how do we participate in this? I figure we get 8 or 10 of them going, and it just rolls downhill from there.
Yeah, and then I wonder if you get opposition in some of these states that have had, I don't necessarily, by the way, see the Ten Commandments and the Bill of Rights as in opposition, but a lot of people, so I don't need to comparison shop necessarily, but I know a lot of people do see it that way in this world. And how do you see the resistance? I mean, do you think there will be resistance in some of those states that have had the, like Alabama with their Ten Commandments? I certainly have a problem enshrining any religious doctrine into a state or government function like they've been trying to do. But do you see any resistance from those guys? I guess it would be hard for them to say no, right? What do you think?
I don't. Well, that's the other beauty of this is a common ground project. The left and the right may embrace different parts of the Bill of Rights more fervently, although there's a lot of common ground in that area too. But the truth is that both sides want what's the Superman phrase? Justice in the American way.
Truth, justice in the American way.
Truth,
Yeah,
justice in the American way. People really do see that vision of that as the best of America. The interesting thing about the Bill of Rights, Richard, is that when it was first ratified, its provisions really only applied to like 5% of the human beings living inside what was in the United States. They didn't apply to blacks. They didn't, or free blacks or slaves. They didn't apply to women. They didn't apply to Native Americans, and they really didn't apply even to white males of less than a certain property and status. But
right, and
there's zero exclusionary language inside the document. And as our concept of freedom grew through the experience of it, and of course a civil war, we grew into the blueprint of the Bill of Rights to where it's now become this global document. So I think it has a lot of appeal for the people who are tired of the divisiveness and sort of the fracturing of our political conversation along these culture war lines. I think we really do have a powerful common ground document here. And, and like you said, this isn't an either or. I mean, as far as the Ten Commandments go, the Ten Commandments is a code of personal moral conduct. And
right.
The Bill of Rights is a blueprint for designing successful institutions for a free, fair, and civil society. They're apples and oranges in terms of the intent of the document. So,
right.
But I really think for this country going forward to understand these underlying principles, it's barely taught in the schools anymore, Richard. That's the other reason we really want to put these up in places of high public traffic. And this is all about school kids. If it is anything, I mean, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and it's a town of monuments, and I can tell you monuments have an impact on people. They make history visible, tangible, and unforgettable, especially for kids. And that's why I think, this is a great way to connect generations to to the best of our heritage.
We're talking to comedian and activist Chris Bliss about his project, mybillofrights.org. And, I'll tell you a couple reasons why I really like this project. I really, we've talked about it for years now. I'll tell you a couple reasons why I really support it. One is that Americans, as you say, young people and older people don't know what's in our Bill of Rights. And frighteningly, as you know, sometimes when people are surveyed, they don't even support the ideas in the Bill of Rights because they don't understand why they're important. They don't understand why the right of privacy is important. They don't understand why the right to freely assemble is important, and so on. The right of free speech is important, and so on. So we need to really educate people on this. And secondly, I think it's important because even in recent months, let's just say that the Bill of Rights has been under some challenge. We've had some revelations about espionage against Americans. Whatever you want to point to, we need to revitalize the conversation around the Bill of Rights and understand what a precious document we created as something that's a model for the world. And I guess as we sort of approach our close here, I don't know, you got any closing? Those are my closing thoughts. Might be a little controversial because, well, I took one of those tests online and it said that about your politics, and it said that on most issues I was a Green Party person, some Democrat, some socialist, and on foreign affairs I was a libertarian. That's how because I don't like espionage and undeclared wars. So that's how common ground the Bill of Rights can be. But that's maybe too controversial for you and your project. But with about 30 seconds to go, what are your closing thoughts on this, Chris? And where can people go to learn more about it?
Well, they can go to the website, mybillofrights.org. This is all the details on the DC event and the matching fund endowment. And we're not just looking for millionaires. This has always been a common ground project and a small donor project. Our average donations, they've averaged under $100 throughout the history of this project. So, but what I really want people to look at in the Bill of Rights is, I think, what I call the Justice Amendment. Everyone knows about free speech and everyone knows about the right to bear arms. But these Justice Amendments, you know, your free speech and your religion and your right to bear arms won't do you much good if you don't have the presumption of innocence against the overpowering justice system in a national security state such as has been created. And these Justice Amendments are very powerful. The Eighth Amendment, I mean, come on, you know, cruel and
Okay.
unusual punishment, all of it. Well, anyway, that's it. Just look at those Justice Amendments.
And that sounds like a common ground issue to me. So with that, we're going to have to leave it. Chris, activist, comedian, mybillofrights.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and we'll be right back. This is The Zero Hour.